The lights came up in the screening room on a June evening in Hollywood, 1993. 400 people sat in that room. In the 96 seconds that followed, the particular silence that falls after a film ends and before an audience decides what to do with what they've just seen, almost nobody moved. Then the applause began. It was the kind of applause that builds from the back of a room and reaches the front, slow at first, then full, then loud enough that the people producing it no longer had to decide how they felt. Kurt Russell stood. He put on his jacket, and he walked, not toward the exit, not toward the cluster of studio executives already congratulating each other near the door, not toward the bar where the after-party was assembling itself, but directly toward Tina Turner. He moved through the crowd with the focused quiet of a man who has somewhere specific to be and does not intend to stop on the way. He reached her. He leaned close. And he said something that the people standing nearest to them could not hear. Something that made Tina Turner go still for a moment in the middle of a room that was still applauding, before he straightened, looked at her directly, and walked away without waiting for a response. To understand what Kurt Russell said, you have to understand what the room had just watched. What's Love Got to Do with It had been 2 years in the making. Angela Bassett had spent months preparing for the role, training, researching, building from the inside out a portrait of a woman whose story most people believed they already knew. Lawrence Fishburne had done the same. The film that emerged was not a straightforward biographical document. It was something more specific than that. A reckoning with what it means to survive a prolonged assault on your identity from the person who was supposed to protect it, and to emerge from that survival with something intact that the assault had been designed to destroy. It was 98 minutes long. It was, in the way that certain films are, completely insufficient to contain what it was attempting to describe. The people in that screening room in June 1993 were not ordinary filmgoers. They were producers and directors and actors and executives and journalists. People who watched films professionally, who understood the machinery of storytelling, who were fluent in the grammar of emotional manipulation. They knew how films worked. They knew, in a technical sense, what was being done to them and why it worked. And it worked on them anyway. By the time the credits rolled, there were people in that room who had been crying for 40 minutes and who were applying now the same professional composure they brought to everything else, constructing in real time the version of their reaction they were prepared to articulate in the conversations that were about to begin. Kurt Russell, in 1993, was one of the most respected actors of his generation. He had spent the previous decade building a body of work that had earned him a particular reputation for taking roles seriously, for preparation, for the kind of commitment that other actors talked about in interviews, but fewer actually demonstrated. He was also, in his private life, a man known among the people who knew him for a particular quality of attention, a quality of actually hearing what was being said in a room, rather than preparing what he intended to say next. He had watched What's Love Got to Do with It from a seat near the middle of the screening room. He had not spoken during it. He had not leaned over to the person beside him. He had watched the film the way he watched everything, completely. And when it ended and the lights came up, he had sat for a moment, then stood, and walked toward Tina Turner. What the room was doing, in those minutes between the credits and the after-party, was something that rooms full of powerful people do in the aftermath of difficult material. It was processing, converting what it had seen into something manageable, something discussable, something that could be transformed into the currency of professional opinion and social conversation. People were talking about Angela Bassett's performance. They were talking about the direction, the script, the music. They were talking about the film as a film, which is to say, they were talking about it in a language that created a useful distance between themselves and what the film had actually been about. This is not a criticism. It is what people do when they have witnessed something that requires distance in order to be absorbed. Tina Turner was in that room. She had seen the film before. She had been involved in its production, had approved what needed to be approved, had been consulted on what she felt it was important to get right. She knew what was in it. And yet, sitting in a screening room and watching her own life, the years of it that had been the hardest, the most private, the most damaging, rendered in the bright, confident grammar of Hollywood, was its own particular experience. One she had not been fully prepared for, despite having prepared. She was surrounded, as she always was in public, by the particular force field that surrounds famous people, the slight space that opens around them, the eye contact that lands differently, the conversations that adjust in pitch when they become aware of being watched. She was doing what she always did in those circumstances. She was composed. She was present. She was managing, with the skill of someone who had been doing it for 4 decades, the gap between the private experience and the public presentation of it. She did not see Kurt Russell coming toward her until he was close. He moved through the crowd with a directness that was not aggressive, but was also not uncertain. He was not stopping to speak to people on his way. He was not accepting the congratulations that people in that room extended toward anyone with enough status to warrant them. He had somewhere to be, and he was going there. When he reached Tina Turner, the people nearest her stepped back slightly. Not deliberately, not with awareness, but in the way that a crowd responds to focus when it enters a space. He leaned close, not in the performative way of someone making a public gesture, in the way of someone who wants to be heard by one person and no one else. He spoke. It was brief. The people standing near enough to observe it later said it lasted perhaps 45 seconds, perhaps less. When he finished, he looked at her directly, for a moment without moving, and then he straightened. He did not wait for a response. He walked away. What Kurt Russell said to Tina Turner in that screening room in June 1993 was not reported. It was not overheard in any account of the premiere that made its way into print. For the people who were in that room and noticed the exchange, it remained precisely what it was, a private moment in a public room between 2 people with no obvious professional connection, lasting less than a minute. What is known is what Tina Turner's expression did in the seconds after he spoke. She went still. Not the composed, managed stillness of her public presence. Something quieter than that. Something that the people who noticed it described afterward as the stillness of a person who has just heard something they were not expecting to be true, and recognized immediately that it was. She looked at him as he walked away. She did not call after him. She did not move toward him. She stood for a moment in the middle of the room, in the noise and the professional congratulations flowing around her, and she was still. Then she composed herself and returned to the room. What Kurt Russell had said, assembled over the years from the fragments that survive in the accounts of people who were close enough to see without being close enough to hear, was this. He told her that the film had not been able to do it, that 98 minutes and the best actors in Hollywood and every tool available to the most powerful storytelling industry in the world had not been able to contain what she had survived. That what he had watched on screen was the outline of something, the shape of it, but that the thing itself, the actual weight and cost and duration of it, had not transferred, could not transfer. was not transferable. And he said, and this was the part that made her go still, that he thought she should know that she should know that what she had lived through was larger than any version of it that anyone else could tell. That no film, no biography, no interview, no applause in a screening room full of Hollywood's most powerful people could reach the actual dimensions of what she had carried. He said, "The story they just watched is the smallest possible version of you, and you deserve to know that." There is a specific kind of recognition that is harder to receive than criticism, harder, in some ways, than praise. The recognition that what you have been through is not fully visible, not even in a film made with the intention of making it visible, can be either diminishing or clarifying, depending on how it is offered and who offers it. Kurt Russell offered it as clarification. In the years that followed the premiere, Tina Turner spoke about the film with the careful appreciation of someone who understood what it had attempted and was grateful for the attempt. She praised Angela Bassett's performance with a generosity that was clearly genuine. She acknowledged the difficulty of watching it. She said in various interviews that it had been important to tell the story. She never spoke publicly about what Kurt Russell had said to her in the screening room. She did not need to. What he had done, in 45 seconds, in a room full of noise and professional congratulation, was give her something that the previous 98 minutes of the most powerful storytelling machine in the world had not been able to give her. He had acknowledged the gap, the distance between what can be shown and what was actually lived, the space where the real thing exists, too large, too specific, too sustained to fit inside any frame. Tina Turner walked out of that screening room into the June evening with the composed steadiness she brought to every public moment. She smiled. She spoke to people. She was present and gracious, and exactly what the room needed her to be. But something in her had been quietly clarified. By a man who had watched the film, understood its limits, and had the particular kind of courage required to walk across a room full of important people and say so. To one person, in less than a minute, without waiting for a response. Some things cannot be filmed. Some things cannot be applauded into existence or reviewed into clarity, or reduced to the running time of any story anyone else chooses to tell about them. Some things are simply what they are, larger than the language available to describe them, larger than the frames built to contain them, larger than any room's capacity to recognize them fully. Kurt Russell understood this on a June evening in Hollywood in 1993, and he walked across a room to say so. Because some things, some very specific, very quiet, very important things, are worth saying directly to the right person, in the right room, even if no one else can hear. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel. Every week we find the moments behind the music that history almost forgot. The words said in screening rooms. The things that could not fit inside the frame. Leave a comment below. Was there ever a moment when someone acknowledged something about your experience that no one else had been willing to name? Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. We will see you in the next story.